Hello, in today's short tutorial we're going to pick up where we left off, roughly. So I've got a new scene here again because we're going to explore a couple of things that you can do with your scene before you ever get started. You don't necessarily have to do any of these things in any particular order. So first I want to tell you a little bit about viewport types. What we did last time was mostly kind of how to manipulate geometry and how to use our transforms. But we weren't really able to make anything that looked decent, that looked semi-realistic or anything like that. So we've got different viewport types in Blender. The first type, the default type that we have here, can be accessed via this little icon up here in this 4-button menu, and that is our solid shaded viewport. And by default it just kind of gives a rough representation of a solid object. To the left of that we also have a wireframe view, and that allows us to look through the object, which can be important when we're kind of planning our scene and when we're trying to figure out the spatial relationships between different objects. But also it can be very important because if we are in edit mode, and you remember you select an object and tab to go into edit mode, if we're in edit mode I can actually select through an object with a wireframe view, whereas with a solid view I can't. By the way, to deselect the way I just did, you double tap A, or to select all you tap A once. Double tap A deselects, or Alt A. And you know what, I don't have my keys turned on, so I am going to turn those on really quickly so you can see what I'm tapping there. Okay, so our solid viewport, we can't select what's on the other side of these things because we can't see through them. Beyond that, we also have a material preview viewport, which kind of shows us the color of an object. This cube is currently just white, so it doesn't look very much different than a solid viewport. We also have a rendered viewport, which takes a little more computation on the part of the computer because it's actually calculating the light and casting shadows. And we don't have a lot in this scene yet to really show that off, but we're going to fix that here in just a second. Speaking of views, however, one other important thing, you might remember, I'm going to tab out of edit mode. Last time I mentioned that we have a couple of other objects in our scene. We have a camera and we have a light, and we didn't do anything with our camera yet. But if we want to look through our camera, we can tap 0 on the number pad. That's not the 0 up above your QWERTY keys, that's just on the number pad. Tapping 0 will take us in and out of that camera view. And when we eventually render a scene, it's going to render through that camera. So we need to be able to move that camera around, and we can move it around just as if it were an object. You see I tapped G there, or else I can use my transform keys here like we did last time, and then I can look through it and I can see that our view is changing a little bit. However, that's not very elegant because then we kind of have to move and check and move and check. The other things we can do, if I hit Shift tilde, tilde is to the left of the number 1 above your QWERTY keys. It's that little squiggly line. If I hit Shift tilde, then it gives me kind of a gaming walk mode, and I can just move my mouse around to point the camera, and I can use the WASD keys to move forward and backward, left and right, and then the E key to move up and the Q key to move down. And then I just click to commit to my view, and that's a really handy way to position the camera. The other one I want to mention is over here in our N key menu. If I click on view and I click this little I check this little checkbox, lock camera to view, then that means that if I tumble my view, I'm actually tumbling my camera. Or if I hit Shift middle click, then I'm panning with my camera. Or if I zoom, I'm zooming with the position of my camera. So that's another way to kind of position your camera by looking through it. So that'll come into play quite a bit later. So the other things I'm going to, by the way, if I tumble my view with without that checkbox, then it just takes me out of the camera view. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to start adding some objects to make a scene. So we've already got this cube here. Let's go back to a solid viewport for a minute, and I'm going to add, I almost always do this with a scene just to add interest. I'm going to add a floor. So I have an add menu here, and under mesh object I have all my primitives. Plane, cube, circle, all of these primitives listed here, and a monkey head. That's kind of an inside joke with the Blender team that actually makes the software. A lot of 3D softwares have what's called a Utah teapot, but really you just need an object that can show complicated reflections and shadows and things like that. So in Blender, it's a monkey head. So I have all these primitives that I can add here, and I'm going to add a cone. And down here I've got this little dialog that popped up, and until I actually start transforming that cone, I can change its attributes. I can change the depth of it, for instance. I can change the bottom radius, which is kind of nice, or the number of vertices that actually make up the cone. Essentially, I can keep up the resolution. I pretty much never fill the end of a circular object with an n-gon. N-gons are pretty bad practice for the kind of 3D that I do, so I either choose nothing or a triangle fan. So in this case I'm going to choose a triangle fan, and there's my cone, so I'm going to start manipulating it. You'll notice that it popped in right at the world origin, and so it's right in the middle of our cube, so I need to move it kind of out of place there so that it doesn't look weird, interpenetrating objects. So there's a cone, and I'm going to add one more object, but this time instead of using the add menu up here, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is Shift A, and that gets me the same menu down here. So I'm going to click Mesh, UV Sphere, and then I'm going to put that over here. I actually lied. I'm going to add one more object after that. So Shift A, and I'm going to add a plane for the floor. And this is the thing I was mentioning that I almost always do. I almost always add a floor because basically it just brings a lot more of sort of a realistic feel to the scene when objects can actually cast shadows. And I want to put this floor exactly on the bottom of these objects. I don't want to eyeball it. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use my move command, so G to grab, and then Z to constrain my Z axis. And I happen to know that this cube and this sphere and this cone are all 2 meters tall. And since this plane appeared in the middle of a 2 meter tall cube, I need to move it 1 meter downward. So I've already specified G, Z axis, and I'm going to tap -1 on my keyboard and then hit enter. Now my floor is not big enough, so I need to scale it. So tap S, and we'll scale it up there. The reason, by the way, that I know that these objects, how tall they are, is if I click on them, go over here to the item information, you can see that it lists the dimensions, 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters, and that's the default for a cube or a sphere or a cone when they're first created in Blender. So there are my objects. I've added them, I've made a floor. I'm going to look through my camera now, Shift Tilde, and kind of drive the camera around a little so I get a little better view. And then I'm going to change my viewport to a rendered viewport, and you can see that my objects are casting shadows. I can move my light around, by the way, to cast shadows in a little bit of a different direction, or have one object cast a shadow onto another object. That's kind of a fun thing. But anyway, that's kind of a nice way to get started with a simple sort of still life primitive scene in Blender. I hope that's helpful, and I hope you have a good day.